found inscribed on weathered stone tablets in a forgotten shrine above Mount Taygetus. These words tell of Alexios the exile, whose solitude became sanctuary for souls as broken as his own. What follows is neither fable nor dream, but the quiet testimony of how 7 women and 1 man discovered that healing begins when we choose to shelter the wounded rather than nurse our own wounds. Before we begin, subscribe now so you don't miss more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The stone hut perched on the mountainside like a grey bird against the darker grey of granite and shadow, its single room carved from living rock and sealed against winter winds with rough-hewn timber and dried mud. Alexios had built it with his own hands during the first bitter months of his exile, when the wound in his leg was still fresh, and the wound in his spirit fresher still. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Mantinea, 5 years since the spear thrust that had saved his comrade's life and shattered his own knee. 5 years since the military physicians had declared him unfit for further service. The Spartan army had no place for lame warriors, no matter how brave their hearts or pure their devotion. Honor demanded that he accept his discharge with dignity, that he find some useful occupation for his remaining years, that he fade gracefully into the background of civilian life. But dignity felt like mockery when a man could no longer march in the phalanx, and usefulness seemed impossible when every step sent lightning through his twisted joint. So he had climbed into the mountains above his native city, carrying nothing but his weapons, his cloak, and the bitter knowledge that he would never again hear his name called in the roll of warriors. The hut had grown around him like a shell around a wounded creature, protecting him from the world's eyes and his own memories of what he had once been. The morning broke gray and cold, with wisps of cloud drifting through the pine trees that clung to the rocky slopes below his refuge. Alexios limped outside to check his snares and gather water from the spring that bubbled up through a crack in the stone, his movements automatic after years of solitary routine. The silence was complete except for the whisper of wind through branches and the distant cry of an eagle riding the mountain thermals. But as he paused to rest his aching leg beside the spring, a different sound reached his ears. Voices carried on the morning air, speaking in the cadences of grief and exhaustion. Female voices, growing closer with each moment, accompanied by the soft shuffle of sandaled feet on the rocky path that led up from the valley below. He retreated quickly to his hut, closing the heavy wooden door and pressing his back against it, as if the simple barrier could protect him from the complications that human contact always brought. But the voices continued to approach, and with them came a choice he had hoped never to face again. Whether to remain hidden in his carefully constructed solitude, or to acknowledge the needs of others who might be as lost as he had once been. The sound of weeping decided the matter for him. 7 women climbed the narrow path toward his refuge, their dark chitons and veils marking them as mourners, even before their tear-streaked faces became visible through the mountain mist. They moved with the careful steps of exhaustion, supporting each other when the rocky trail demanded more strength than grief had left them. The youngest might have seen 20 summers, the eldest perhaps 40, but sorrow had aged them all beyond their years. Alexios watched from his doorway as they approached, his warrior's eye automatically cataloging details even as his heart contracted with unwelcome sympathy. Their clothing spoke of modest prosperity, good wool, careful weaving, but showing the wear of long travel. Dust caked their sandals and the hems of their garments. Dark circles shadowed their eyes and their skin bore the pallor of women who had not eaten properly for days. The eldest among them, a woman whose silver-streaked hair had escaped its careful braiding, noticed him first. She stopped so suddenly that the others nearly stumbled into her, their faces turning toward the unexpected figure in the doorway with expressions that cycled rapidly through fear, hope, and desperate calculation. "Forgive our intrusion, warrior," she said, her voice carrying the careful courtesy of someone who understood that survival sometimes depended on proper manners. "We seek shelter for the night. We can pay." She held up a small leather pouch that clinked softly with the sound of bronze coins, but her hand trembled with more than cold. Alexios saw the way the other women clustered behind her, the protective instincts of a pack protecting its weakest members, and recognized something in their desperate dignity that echoed his own long struggle with circumstances beyond control. "I am no warrior," he said finally, stepping back to let them see his twisted leg and the walking stick he carved from mountain oak. "I am exile, unfit for service. But the night will be cold, and my fire burns warm." The relief that washed over their faces was so profound that he felt his throat tighten. How long, he wondered, had they been walking? How many doors had been closed to them before they climbed high enough to find his refuge? "We are widows of the plague that struck Tegea," the eldest woman continued, her words carrying the weight of fresh loss. "Our husbands, all of them, within the span of a single moon. The city council declared our homes forfeit to pay their debts. We go to seek shelter with distant kin in Argos. 7 husbands, 7 homes, 7 lives shattered by the random cruelty of disease and the systematic cruelty of laws that protected property better than people." Alexios had seen enough of war to recognize when defeat came in forms other than bronze and blood. "Enter," he said simply, pushing the door wide. "My home is small, but the roof is sound and the walls keep out the wind." As they filed past him into the stone chamber that had been his hermitage, he realized that his carefully constructed solitude was about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. The single room of Alexios's hut had never seemed smaller than it did with 7 women arranged around the central fire pit, their traveling bundles forming makeshift seats and their dark garments creating pools of shadow that flickered in the orange light. He moved among them with the careful courtesy of a man unaccustomed to female company, offering water from his spring and the simple fare that sustained his mountain existence: barley bread, dried figs, honey from wild bees, and wine so watered that it barely deserved the name. They ate in silence at first, the hungry quiet of people too exhausted for conversation, but gradually the warmth of the fire and the basic comfort of shelter began to thaw the frozen grief that surrounded them like winter fog. The youngest woman, barely more than a girl really, with dark eyes that held too much knowledge of loss, began to speak in a voice soft as falling snow. "His name was Nicomenes," she said, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust beside her feet. "We were married 3 months. The fever took him in 4 days. He kept asking for water, but no amount seemed enough to quench the burning inside him." The words opened floodgates that had been sealed by the necessity of survival. One by one, the other women began to speak their husbands' names and tell their stories, tales of love cut short, of children left fatherless, of futures that had crumbled like pottery dropped on stone. Alcestis spoke of 30 years of marriage ending in a single night. Melania described watching her young husband waste away until she could carry him in her arms like a child. Penthesilea told of a warrior's death that came not in glorious battle, but in the shameful weakness of disease. Alexios listened in silence, his own cup forgotten in his hands, as he realized that his years of self-imposed isolation had protected him from this. The raw, unfiltered pain of people whose losses were fresh as open wounds. These women carried sorrows that made his own exile seem like a minor inconvenience, yet they bore their burdens with a dignity that humbled him. "And you?" asked Melania, the silver-haired leader of their small procession. "What brought you to this mountain refuge?" The question hung in the smoky air like a challenge. Alexios found himself looking into 7 pairs of eyes that held neither judgment nor pity, only the patient attention of people who understood that every soul carried some burden too heavy to bear alone. "I was lame," he said simply, "so I was no longer useful to those who had valued only my ability to fight." "Useful?" repeated the eldest woman with a bitter laugh that held no humor, as if human worth could be measured like grain or counted like coins. She reached across the small space between them and touched his scarred hand with fingers that trembled only slightly. "You gave us shelter when we had none, warrior. You shared your food when we were hungry. If that is not useful, then the word has no meaning." Outside, the mountain wind howled through the pines, carrying with it the promise of a hard night for any soul caught without protection. But inside the stone walls, 7 strangers and 1 exile discovered that sometimes the most profound shelter comes not from keeping the world out, but from letting the right people in. Dawn came slowly to the mountain refuge, seeping through the cracks around the door like honey poured from a distant jar. The fire had burned low during the night, but the warmth of human presence had transformed the small space into something that felt less like a hermit's cave and more like a home. Alexios woke to find that the women had arranged themselves around the chamber like the petals of some dark flower, their breathing soft and regular in the gray light that preceded sunrise. Melania was already awake, sitting with her back against the stone wall and her eyes fixed on the dying embers. When she noticed his movement, she gestured toward the others with the gentle pride of a mother watching sleeping children. "They haven't slept so peacefully since before the plague," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of wind in the trees outside. "For weeks they've startled awake at every sound, afraid that death might come calling again." Alexios studied the faces around him, noting how sleep had smoothed away some of the harsh lines that grief had carved there. The youngest woman had curled herself into a small ball beside the fire, one hand still clutching the woolen bundle that contained her few remaining possessions. An older woman, Alcestis, who had spoken of 30 years of marriage, slept with tears still wet on her cheeks, but with an expression more peaceful than any she had worn the night before. "And you?" he asked. "Do you sleep peacefully?" Melania's smile was sad but genuine. "I am their anchor," she said. "I cannot afford to drift away on the tide of my own sorrow. But perhaps for one night, I can rest easier knowing that we are safe." As the others began to stir, the stone chamber filled with the quiet sounds of women preparing for another day of uncertain travel. But something had changed during the night, some invisible alchemy that transformed their relationship from that of strangers sharing necessity to something approaching family. They moved around each other with the unconscious consideration of people who had begun to trust, and when young Penthesilea discovered that her meager store of bread had grown moldy during their journey, 3 others immediately offered to share their own provisions. Alexios watched this quiet dance of mutual care with something approaching wonder. In his years of military service, he had seen the bonds that formed between warriors who faced death together, but this was different, gentler, more patient, born not of shared danger, but of shared loss, and the recognition that healing came easier when burdens were divided rather than carried alone. "We should leave with first light," Melania said as the women gathered their belongings. "We have imposed on your kindness long enough, and the road to Argos will not grow shorter for our lingering." But as they prepared to descend the mountain path, Alexios found himself speaking words he had not planned to say. "The weather grows cold, and winter storms can trap travelers for days in these mountains. Perhaps you might consider remaining until the season turns more favorable." The silence that followed was filled with unspoken questions and possibilities too fragile to be examined too closely. Finally, the youngest woman, the one who had been married only 3 months, spoke with the simple honesty of youth. "We have nowhere else to go," she said. "Our kin in Argos may welcome us or they may see us as burdens. Here, we know we are wanted." And in that moment, Alexios realized that his exile was about to become something he had never expected, a place of refuge for souls as lost as his own. The hut that had sheltered one exile in bitter solitude became, over the following weeks, the center of an unlikely community that grew like moss on mountain stone, slowly, quietly, but with surprising tenacity. The women proved remarkably resourceful, transforming the harsh landscape around Alexios' refuge into something approaching a functioning homestead. Alcestis, whose 30 years of marriage had taught her the arts of preservation and preparation, showed them how to smoke meat from Alexios' hunting and dry the wild herbs that grew in rocky crevices. Penthesilea and the younger women proved adept at weaving baskets from mountain willow and fashioning crude pottery from clay they discovered near the spring. Even simple tasks became communal efforts, gathering firewood, preparing meals, mending clothes worn thin by travel and grief. Melania emerged as their natural leader, organizing work and settling the small disputes that arose when people lived in close quarters. But it was the evenings that truly bound them together. As the mountain cold drove them close around the fire, they began to share more than stories of loss. Alcestis possessed a fine voice for singing the old songs that preserved memory and eased sorrow. Young Penthesilea knew riddles and word games that could coax laughter from even the most grieving heart. Melania had been educated in letters and could read aloud from the scrolls that some of the women had salvaged from their former homes. Alexios found himself drawn into these evening gatherings despite his long habit of solitude. His years in the military had given him stories of distant lands and foreign customs, while his months of mountain living had taught him the lore of weather and wildlife that could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Gradually, almost without noticing, he began to speak more freely than he had in years, his voice losing the rusty quality that came from too much silence. "You were a good warrior," Melania observed one evening as he finished recounting a tale of a siege in Messenia. "I can hear it in the way you speak of your comrades, the way your voice changes when you remember the weight of shields and the sound of bronze on bronze." "I was adequate," Alexios replied, unconsciously rubbing his twisted knee, "until I became a liability instead of an asset. Adequate warriors don't receive the scars you carry," she said gently, "and they don't inspire the loyalty I hear in your voice when you speak of the men who fought beside you." She paused, then added with the careful precision of someone who had given thought to her words, "Perhaps the army lost more than you realized when they decided you were no longer useful." The conversation might have continued, but a sound from outside the hut cut through the evening's comfortable warmth, the whinny of horses and the jingle of bronze fittings that could only mean one thing. Armed men were climbing the mountain path, and they were close enough that retreat was no longer possible. As Alexios reached for his spear, with movements made clumsy by sudden fear, he realized that their fragile sanctuary was about to face its first real test. The horsemen who emerged from the mountain mist wore the red cloaks and bronze armor of Spartan cavalry, their faces grim beneath helmets burnished to mirror brightness. 6 warriors in full battle gear, led by a man whose bearing and scarred features marked him as a veteran of countless campaigns. They drew rein before the hut, with the casual authority of soldiers accustomed to being obeyed without question. Alexios limped forward to meet them, his walking stick planted firmly in the rocky soil and his chin raised despite the fear that made his heart thunder against his ribs. Behind him, he could hear the women gathering in the doorway, their presence both comfort and burden, as he faced whatever judgment these men had brought to his mountain refuge. "Alexios, son of Cleomenes," the leader announced, his voice carrying across the small clearing like bronze striking stone. "I am Lysander, captain of the 3rd Regiment. You are ordered to appear before the ephors to answer charges of harboring fugitives and corrupting public morals." The words hit like physical blows, each accusation carrying the weight of law and the threat of consequences that could destroy everything they had built in their brief time together. Alexios felt the familiar bitterness of exile rising in his throat, the old knowledge that men like him existed at the sufferance of those who held power and could be discarded the moment convenience demanded it. "Fugitives?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. "These women are widows seeking shelter, not criminals fleeing justice. They are unmarried women living without proper male guardianship," Lysander replied with the mechanical precision of a man reciting charges he did not fully understand. "Such arrangements corrupt the natural order and set dangerous precedents for other women who might seek to escape their proper roles." Melania stepped forward then, her silver hair catching the morning light, and her bearing carrying the dignity of a woman who had faced losses far more terrible than the disapproval of distant officials. "Captain," she said, her voice carrying the gentle authority that had made her their natural leader, "we seek only to survive until we can find proper homes with kinsmen who might accept us. Would you condemn us to starve in ditches for the crime of helping each other through grief?" "I condemn no one," Lysander said, but his voice carried less certainty than before. "I follow orders given by men wiser than myself. The arrangement here violates established law and must be dissolved." He turned back to Alexios, his expression hard, but not unsympathetic. "You will come with us immediately. The women will be returned to their nearest male relatives or sold to cover their debts. This experiment ends today." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind in the pines and the distant cry of an eagle hunting in the valley below. Alexios looked at the faces of the women who had become more than refugees in their shared weeks of community. At young Penthesileia's tears, at Alcestis's quiet dignity, at Melania's resignation that held more sorrow than anger. These people who had given him purpose when purpose seemed lost, who had reminded him that usefulness came in forms the military had never taught him to recognize. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. No. The single word hung in the mountain air like thunder before lightning, transforming the space between exile and authority into a battlefield where honor and law prepared to test their strength against each other. Lysander's hand moved instinctively toward his sword hilt, while his men shifted in their saddles with the nervous energy of warriors sensing conflict. "You refuse a direct order from the Ephors?" the captain demanded, his voice carrying disbelief that anyone would choose such obvious destruction. "You understand what this means? I understand that law should serve justice, not the other way around," Alexios replied, his walking stick planted firmly in the rocky soil and his scarred face set with the determination of a man who had finally found something worth defending. "These women have committed no crime except surviving when their husbands could not. They have harmed no one, stolen nothing, corrupted no one's children. If offering them shelter makes me a criminal, then I choose criminality over complicity." Melania stepped beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a gesture of support that spoke of bonds forged in shared struggle. One by one, the other women joined them, not in defiance, for they were too wise to challenge armed men directly, but in quiet solidarity that transformed their small group into something larger than the sum of its parts. "Captain," Melania said, her voice carrying the steady strength that had guided them through their darkest days. "Look at us. Look closely. Do we appear to be corrupting influences? Do we seem dangerous to your precious order?" Lysander's gaze traveled over the women, from young Penthesileia's tear-streaked face to Alcestis's weathered hands, from their carefully mended clothes to the quiet dignity with which they faced potential disaster. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the professional mask of military authority cracking just enough to reveal the human being beneath. "You appear to be people in difficult circumstances," he admitted slowly, "but the law is clear about unmarried women living without proper supervision. Then perhaps the law requires examination," a new voice interjected from the mountain path below. All heads turned toward the speaker, an elderly man in the simple robes of a philosopher, climbing the rocky trail with the careful steps of someone whose authority came from wisdom rather than force. His presence changed the entire nature of the confrontation, transforming what had been a matter of military discipline into something approaching a philosophical debate. "Thrasyllis," Lysander said, his voice carrying surprise and a measure of respect. "I did not expect to find you on this mountain. I go where interesting questions arise," the old man replied with a gentle smile. "And this situation poses fascinating questions about the relationship between law and justice, between tradition and necessity." He studied the small community that had formed around Alexios's refuge, his keen eyes noting details that military minds might miss, the evidence of cooperation in the way tasks had been divided, the signs of healing in faces that had clearly known recent grief, the quality of mutual care that had transformed refugees into family. "Tell me, Captain," Thrasyllis continued, settling himself on a convenient stone as if preparing for a lengthy discussion. "What harm have these people done to Sparta? What damage to our strength? What corruption of our values? They violate the proper order. They demonstrate that people can heal each other's wounds through cooperation and mutual aid." The philosopher interrupted gently. They show that survival is possible even when traditional structures fail. They prove that human worth extends beyond conventional categories of useful and useless. Are these truly corruptions, or are they demonstrations of virtues we claim to value? The debate that followed lasted until the sun reached its zenith, with arguments flowing like water around stones as law and philosophy tested their strengths against each other. But in the end, it was not logic that decided the matter. It was the sight of young Penthesilea offering water to the horses and Alcestis quietly preparing a meal for men who had come to destroy their refuge. "We will return to the Ephors with a recommendation," Lysander announced finally, his voice carrying the weight of a difficult decision. "That this arrangement be permitted to continue under official supervision as an experiment in alternative forms of social organization." He paused, then added with something approaching warmth, "The old ways are not always the best ways, especially when circumstances demand new solutions." As the cavalry rode back down the mountain path, leaving the small community to continue its quiet work of healing, Alexios realized that their victory was more than personal. They had proven that society's unwanted could create value through cooperation, that the broken could help mend each other, that exile need not mean isolation if people chose to build bridges instead of walls. In the years that followed, their mountain refuge became a place of pilgrimage for those whom life had cast aside: widows, disabled veterans, orphaned children, anyone who needed to learn that worth was not determined by society's narrow definitions of usefulness. The community grew and evolved, developing its own customs and wisdom, becoming a living testament to the truth that healing is possible when people choose to shelter each other's sorrows rather than nurse their own wounds in solitude. And Alexios, the exile who had sought only to escape the world's judgment, discovered that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from conquering others, but from creating spaces where the conquered can learn to conquer themselves. For in the end, the strongest fortress is not built of stone and bronze, but of human hearts, choosing again and again to open their doors to those who have nowhere else to go.